I've been using ego state therapy, for several decades now as part of my practice as an integrative psychotherapist. It's something I'm very passionate about, and something that, as we'll talk about, transcends what people sometimes think, but isn't this parts therapy? No, it's not. It really is something very, very different to standard parts therapy. And as an introduction for parts therapy came from the concept of ego states as a very, very, very simplistic way of looking at ego states. But ego states itself is a very complex approach. So let's look at what ego states involve. Ego state therapy itself. As I said, I really find ego state therapy an amazing way of working with my clients. Full disclosure, my background, originally I came from psychopharmacology, drugs and how they affect or how they work on emotions. Became a clinical hypnotherapist at the mid-1990s and have never looked back since. And so I've always had an interest in dissociation, in the concept of splitting of the mind. And what drew me to ego state therapy was this concept that it was more than just a part. It was, in effect, a mini personality within the mind. And when we say a mini personality, it really is a part of the mind that has its own particular role. It has a function. It has a role. It has a function. It also has its own particular personality within that. I'll come back to that in a minute, just in case somebody gets worried about dissociative identity disorder. But it has a role. It has a personality, a very distinct personality. When you communicate with these sub-personalities, with these ego states, you do see a very, very distinct element that comes out. And as it has its own personality, it has its own moods, it has its own way of responding to situation based on those moods. So it's quite an interesting, connected part of the mind that's driving how we interact with situations. And it has a role. It also has a function. So the role could be it's a protector, it's a punisher, it's whatever it might be. The function is to carry out something that it perceives is right in this particular situation. And of interest to us as well is it not only just has these elements, but it also has its own particular gender identity within that. So one's biological gender does not define the gender identity of a particular ego state. So there could be a mix of ego states with a mix of different gender identities within any one person. We have these little independent or seemingly independent parts of the mind within us. We know that they are a natural part of our psyche. When I say it's a natural part of our psyche, they are naturally formed. And when we're thinking about this, we need to remember that when we talk about an ego state, it is an integrated pathway of mood and thought. So just as, I'm here and I have an ego state that is helping me to be a lecturer at this precise moment in time, that ego state has thoughts going through, has moods. My mood is I'm excited, my mood is I'm alert, my mood is I'm enthusiastic. It has a pathway of thought that's connected with that, which is accessing all of my knowledge about ego states and about the course and so on. And we know that the ego states, most of our ego states are formed after birth. There's particular ego states that are said to have been born with us, and that's something that we can open up to debate at someone. They know our sense of purpose. But the majority of ego states that we experience or we have develop when we encounter situations that need responding to in a particular way. And so we feel, or the theory is that most of our ego states are thought to develop during childhood, but there are also ones that will be created as we grow older, as we move into different experiences in life. So what we know, these ego states are very functional. That's the thing that we have to start with, to begin with, the premise we start with. They are very, very functional. They are there to help us in life. They are there to keep us protected, to help us to learn and adapt to situations. Some, as you know, part of talking about this with regard to therapy, some are considered dysfunctional. The majority of those so-called dysfunctional ones are just simply doing what they did when they were first formed and haven't evolved with the rest of the psyche. Ego states. There are, surprise, surprise, several different types of ego states that are out there. And just so that you know, the abbreviation ES equals ego states. How many ego states do we have? We don't know. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of them. And that's something, as I say, we know the ego states are a sum of all our parts. The ego states know that they are part of the whole. Say, I was addressing, if anyone is thinking, oh gosh, well, won't this create dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities? Absolutely not. The ego states are aware of that they are part of a whole, and ego state therapy is actually used within the treatment of dissociative identity disorder, or as it used to be called, multiple personality disorder. We've got certain terminology that helps us define the functions and the types of ego states. The first is what we would call the executive ego state. The executive ego state is the one that is functional at any one moment in time. So at the moment, my prime ego state in my head is my lecturer ego state, with specific reference to it being my ego state therapy lecturing ego state. So there's a very specific ego state that's running me at the moment. It's in the driving seat. And so it is hopefully making me very functional with regards to ego state therapy and imparting information to you all about it. So it's in the driving seat, if you like to think of it in that particular way. However, my functional, very functional ego state, that's my lecturer ego state, is not necessarily going to want to be there, and I don't want it to be there for forever. I know after I finish this, I'll probably go and have some lunch. So another ego state will jump into the executive. My I'm hungry, what do I want to eat? Ego state. I've got 2 dogs. Later on this afternoon, I'll want to take them out. And so a specific ego state that is very attached to my 2 dogs will come into the executive. Those of you who know me know I love science fiction. You can probably tell from behind me a bit of a Dalek up there to behind my shoulder. But when I sit down to watch Doctor Who, when I sit down to watch Marvel films or whatever, my relaxation, my sci-fi geek ego state will be driving me. I won't be sitting there thinking about ego state therapy. Or will I? Come to that in a minute. So what happens? My lecturing ego state is here. Where does it go when it's not needed and another ego state needs to be in the driving seat? Well, it goes into this area here where that's metaphorically where these things called surface states rest. These are the states, my ego states, that jump in and jump out of the executive all the time. So, as I say, the moment I finish lecturing here or talking to you guys here, I will come out of the meeting and my what do I want for lunch ego state jumps in and starts to function. The important thing as well to remember, these are the ego states. They are going in and out all the time. They're helping us to function in everyday life. And importantly to remember, they are all in communication with each other. In order for my lecturing ego state to mention my bit of a Dalek there, my sci-fi geek ego state needs to be there, which reminds me, I've got the geeky Dalek. My other ego state here, which might be saying, yeah, I'm also a part of this. You've got to watch the Sandman TV series that's come up. So they're in communication. So even when sci-fi geek ego state is here, the lecturer ego state is there in the background. I might be watching a program and I might get ideas for therapy from watching that program. I'm not in lecture mode or therapist mode, but I'm in communication with everything that's down here. So they're in communication. They jump in and out of the executive as and when they're needed. So they are very, very functional. But what happens when they become less needed, when perhaps there is no function left for them? Well, they go into an area below the surface they become what are called underlying ego states or underlying states. They're ego states that have a function. They are always there. The thing about an ego state, it never goes away. It is always there. It just becomes less used. It might also become a state that is resting for one reason or another. So these states are rarely going into the executive. Some may be formed, may be used for early part of the life and then never come into the executive again. But they're still there. They're still influencing the mind. So there is a communication. Some will be communicating down here without even the executive knowing. Some will be able to jump in and out of the executive on rare occasions. Some will be talking to underlying states, but rarely, if ever, the executive. So this is the realm of where we might have suppressed or repressed parts of ourselves. An emotional part may be in there, and it may be stuck down there, wanting to be communicated with, but doesn't know how to do it. And so we have these states in and out, in and out, in and out with regards to that. Anyone got anything they'd like to ask? Or perhaps as I've been talking, you might have recognized ego states within yourself. Anyone got anything that they'd like to share with regards to that? Okay, so they're all there. They're all doing their thing. These are part of the psyche. These are part of us. They know they are a part of us. Going back to dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities, those are ego states. The multiple personalities, the alters, as they're referred to in dissociative identity disorder, they know they are themselves, but they do not recognize themselves as part of the whole. They recognize other ego states, but are not recognizing them as part of the whole, which is why they act so independently. And because when they jump in to the executive, they take it over completely and break all communication here. So they just think that they're the only one. These are annoying other people around them. They do refer to them, but so it's usually created through very, very traumatic circumstances. So high levels of trauma will shatter the psyche. Ego states break off. Ego states get formed in order to cope, but they never recognize themselves as part of the whole. So just a little bit there about that. Having said that, as well as ego state therapy, very good for reconnecting ego states. Ego state therapy is really good for working with trauma as well. A little bit more about that in a moment. But there's something called the introject that comes into play here. A little bit about the introject. The introject is a time-frozen image, when I say image, it can be a picture, it can be a sound, it can be a feeling, but it's something that does not belong to the psyche. So an introject could be a critical teacher that is criticizing the client as they in their as in their early life, and every time they go into a particular performance, then the introject comes in and there's that damning voice that comes through. Or the introject is not always a nasty thing. The introject could be a loving person. The introject could be a caring pet. An introject could be a thunderstorm. So it's an image that's time frozen that has an effect on the psyche, on the experience of the person, but is not a part of the person. Ego states are a part of us, introjects not. As I say, they can be scary, they can be loving. So ego state therapy, what we're doing with the course is we are working in this realm down here. Now, ego state therapy does not need hypnosis in order for it to be effective. And part of the course, hypnosis will help ego state therapy, but is not essential. What we do teach on the course is a way of helping to get people into a nice, relaxed, altered state of awareness where you can work with the ego states, irrespective of your therapy background. And what we're looking at within the course is identifying dysfunctional ego states, and I'm careful about that because I have to put that in quotes. A dysfunctional ego state was once functional. It's very rare for it not to have been functional. It did something that helped the person. It just got a bit stuck and just keeps repeating the thing over and over again. And so eventually it will become potentially dysfunctional with regard to that. So what we're looking at within the work that we do is it's a bit like, as I call it, family therapy for the brain. It's going in, it's working with certainly the surface states, I'm inviting them to come in and out of the executive, recognizing that underlying states might be present. And very much when you're looking at upset, helping to identify those ego states and giving them a voice, either by directly encouraging them to come into the executive, or perhaps by finding an ego state that can communicate on behalf of the client and behalf of the therapist with this ego state that's so deep down in the underlying area that it doesn't want to connect, and be a mouthpiece for it. So by going into the executive itself. So it's about collaboration within the states. It's about negotiation within the states. Various ego states could be in conflict with each other. So, for example, you might have a very mature adult state that becomes in conflict with a younger, a less mature ego state. And we may need to do some work with connecting the two and negotiating an outcome. You might have a particular state that is scared because of a past event. It knows it's scared, a phobic state. But what we can do with an ego state is therapy is help it to connect with other states that can be supportive. So a braver state, a confident state, a calm state if it's always getting very emotional at inappropriate times. So there's a lot of work that happens here. The interesting thing as well, when we're working with ego states, and the course itself is very, very practically oriented, and the live weekends are very practical, and you'll be working with your ego states and looking at different protocols for working with ego states. Protocols as well for helping you to identify how to integrate it into other work that you might be doing. So, for example, those of you who know EMDR or thinking about training in EMDR, you will find that there's a lot of research between the ego state community and the EMDR community that's understanding that an ego state is the same as what in EMDR is termed a node. the node, which is a central point on which you begin a processing with EMDR. So the two are interconnected. If I'm working with EMDR, and I get stuck on a particular node, it's not processing, I move into ego state therapy approaches and understand what's going on with the node ego state, and then I can work with other ego states to support the node and go back into EMDR. Or I could get an ego state in ego state therapy that is being very scared and be able to work with it, open eye, with EMDR to help process its fear. So it's very interlinked as well. And with regard to that, as I say, the introject, we can talk to the introject, we can interact with it, it can interact with us. It's a perception in the client's mind. Always remember that. And that's what we're talking about with what we're doing. Start you off on a very straightforward and effective way of working with ego states, and then we'll start building up your ability to work with them. We'll also build up your ability to be able to recognize when an ego state is in the executive. One of the things that I've learned, and my colleagues have learned over time, is that from an ego state perspective, as remember I said it's got its own moods, it's got its own personalities. You can see quite often when an ego state has stepped into the executive, even during a case history. And my clients know that I work with ego states, and I usually set them up to understand a little bit about ego states. And so even in a case history, I can see my client shift into what I might perceive as a different ego state, or an ego state has stepped into the executive, and I can talk to it from that perspective. It makes the case history taking quite interesting if you've got to working with somebody who's got quite a lot of emotion attached, and you can do some very good work with regards to that. And those of you who are into analysis by using regression, ego states can also be used to go back in time in the mind. They can help to bridge back to the time they were formed. So we can do even regressive work with them. All things that we'll talk about. And part of what we're doing is about understanding how you can work with these states and with a variety of different presenting issues, from relatively straightforward, if such a thing exists, things like smoking and eating, through ego strengthening, well-being, and so on, through to working with trauma, working with obsessive compulsive disorders, and so on. We've got protocols to teach you with regard to that. It is a superb thing in its own right, and the only way one will find out is if you work with it. As I say, part of what we'll be doing is helping you to go through the process, getting you familiar with your ego states, but at the same time, what we'll be doing is teaching you how to teach your clients to be aware of their ego states in a functional way and how to work with that. Just as hypnotherapists teach self-hypnosis, we can teach ego states work to our clients. They can't do in-depth stuff. I always remember when I was taught how to teach clinical self-hypnosis to my clients, I thought, well, I'm going to do myself out of a job. It isn't that. It is an empowerment tool, but they can't do the work that one can do being guided by an experienced therapist. So always remember that. So the point here is you've got a lot of parts of the mind, some very familiar parts that are there all the time, and others that are deep down hidden away. So any questions anyone's got? I'll go back to questions at the very end, but okay. With the course, and I want to just let you know, the course itself is a component of our Advanced Practitioner Diploma in Integrative Psychotherapy. It is a course in its own right. Just remember that, it's a course in its own right. You don't have to do any of the other courses on the app dip, as we affectionately refer to it. It is a course in its own right. However, it is also designed to integrate with the other courses on this journey. Part of this, some of you who've worked with us before know we have our online learning environment, the LSCCH Learning Zone. Our Learning Zone is a Moodle, and it contains course notes, chat facilities, ability to watch videos, and so on. All our courses, when we do the live sessions, the live online sessions, we always record those. However, just so that you know, the recordings are only ever made available to people on that specific course. So we keep confidentiality, we keep it there for you. They don't replace live learning, but what they're there for is to, you've been through the weekend and you get to the end of the weekend and you've 2 days into the following week and you think, now what on earth was it Peter said about the introjects? And you can go back and you can go in and watch that video that's there. Videos material is available nominally, we say it's there for a couple of years, and that's only because we have to put in a proviso that the server that the Learning Zone is on only has a set amount of space. As yet, and we've had the Learning Zone for a very long time, we have not yet had to clean out and stop access to particular courses. So you will have access to the course for a very long time. Within the Ego State Therapy course, we've also got an added freebie. We've got a small module on solution-focused therapy. It's online, and just so it gives you a different perspective on positive psychology, a positive way of working with clients, which you don't have to use. It's not an examinable part, but it's there as part of what we offer. But the APTIP course itself, just so that you know and are aware, we've got the Ego State Techniques, which is what we are talking about now, open to all psychotherapists. We have our EMDR course, very popular course as well, open to all psychotherapists. There is an ABPP course, which basically means Addictive Behaviours and Psychological Pain course, which is only open to hypnotherapists because it's very hypnosis oriented. So you need to know how to carry out hypnotherapy with that. And that's about, as I said, addictions. It's about a wide variety of other elements. I'm looking at depression, deeper depression, as opposed to objectively low moods, and other areas that are associated with that. There's our CBT course. It's CBT approaches, which is there for all psychotherapists, comes from the REBT tradition and within that. And then there's our IP course, Integrative Psychotherapy module, open to all psychotherapists. What we do within that course is we have a big frame. We teach a frame of understanding for what is known as integrative psychotherapy. Very much coming to the forefront at the moment, sometimes referred to as the fourth wave of psychotherapies, whatever we call it. It's there. It's about a frame of, and also we're teaching you a variety of other approaches, looking at systems approaches to understanding your client, and genograms. We look at gender, we look at sexuality, we look at cultural elements, racism within therapy, and so on. Basically, IP gives a frame of reference for those people wanting to become an integrative psychotherapist, in which to connect these and any other therapy that one wants to undertake into that frame. And some of you who may not be hypnotherapists may be saying, well, I can't do that. Well, actually, you can. What the APTIP consists of, the three required courses are EMDR, Ego State Therapy, and the IP. And there is a choice then of either CBT, which doesn't require hypnotherapy, or ABPP, which does require hypnotherapy, or if you're really enthusiastic, you can do both of those. But that's what this particular course does. Nancy, I'm picking on you because your camera came on and your sound came on.
No, the last slide that you shared by saying stated that ego state therapy is only open to all psychotherapists. and only ABPP is for hypnotherapists. So we
Hypnotherapists are
are,
psychotherapists.
sorry again.
Hypnotherapists are psychotherapists. We include hypnotherapists within the broad term of psychotherapist.
So we are considered as a psychotherapist as well after we finish our
Hyp-
specialist?
Hypnotherapy is psychotherapy. Freudian therapy is psychotherapy. Counseling psychotherapy. So the word psychotherapy has a broad coverall for lots of different types of practices. So I trained as a clinical hypnotherapist. As that, I was under that umbrella of psychotherapy. I am a psychotherapist who uses hypnotherapy. I am now an integrative psychotherapist because I use hypnotherapy, ego states, EMDR, solution-focused approaches, spiritual approaches, energy approaches within it. So basically, anyone here, if you practice any form of psychotherapy, you're more than welcome to come on to the ego state course. If you are looking at the ABPP, you have to have a hypnotherapy qualification simply because you wouldn't understand the approaches and the techniques that we talk about on that course. So
Okay. So, but it's in the, I saw it just under the branch of the advanced, right? So it will be standalone kind of courses, right?
they are standalone courses. Each one of those are standalone courses. You can do one and that's it. And you will, at the end of that, you'll get a qualification in ego states or EMDR or the ABPP qualification or the Integrative Psychotherapy module qualification. Put them together, and at the end of that, there's an examination which is basically, if you're looking at the APDIP, the Advanced Practitioner Diploma in Integrative Psychotherapy, you need to present a case study, and then you are given a small viva on that case study. And the case study will be about showing how you integrate different approaches into psychotherapy.
Okay. So meaning that all the individual courses, if we manage to pick up and to complete it, so meaning to say that after we having all these individual courses, so we consider we already have our advanced diploma.
You will have it once you complete the Viva examination.
All right.
And thank you. You just made the individual courses, the exam. We don't like calling them exams anymore. A very loaded word. The evaluations, the assessments for those, for these courses. So on this course, all of them, you've got continuous observation of how you're interacting with the material and your understanding and your practical elements. And then there is a multiple choice questionnaire. It's open book because we can't be sitting in your homes. No little cameras watching you. So you got a multiple choice questionnaire, questions to ensure you understand the theoretical element that's there and some of the practical applications. So,
All right. Thank
okay,
you.
pleasure. Anybody else got anything they'd like to add or ask me? As I say, I use this an awful lot in my practice directly. I've got a client this evening, and part of my plan is to do some ego state work. I've agreed it with him. Ego state work comes in after we have stabilized the client. So I've done some work with my client using hypnotherapy, my prime discipline, which stabilizes him. Emotional resources are in place. And now we're going to go in and deal with the more traumatic element that he's presenting with. I think we're about the fifth session now, fourth, fifth session with him. So now we can start addressing that deeper issue with him. And ego state work is a great area to become involved with because it really, really can help you connect with approaches that can help shift your client along, especially if they're particularly stuck in their therapy journey.